Hey folks, welcome to part 4 of the Church Reset read-through. We're continuing on in chapter 2. I know those numbers can be a bit confusing, but the fourth episode of the read-through, the latter half of chapter 2. As always, I'm going to remind you, click like if you're watching on YouTube, but more than anything, the Church Reset podcast feed is my favorite thing to plug. If you enjoy the work here, if you want to support it, jackwilkie.co, as you see the URL there if you want to support me on my Substack site there, or the broader work of Focus Press that I and my colleagues are doing at Focus Press at focuspress.org/donate. It's greatly appreciated. Check those out if you want to send some support our way. And again, it's free to click the like button, free to click subscribe. That helps us out as well, so be sure to get on that. All right, let's go ahead and get into this week's read-through. We're continuing on in the second half of the chapter. As I said, I'm not going to critique my writing style too much. It's been a few years. You learn a few things, but this chapter kind of folds back in on itself, and so it can be a bit redundant in that we kind of laid out what businesses have to do in the first half of the chapter, and then we're in the second half kind of running it through. Is that what we see? Is that what's happening? Is church too business-like in its current construction? And I believe the answers hold up that yes, it is. So let's go ahead and get into that, starting with here in the middle of chapter 2, the symptoms subheading. If this theory is correct, that the consumer-provider split is hurting the church and keeping it from being all it can be, and if we really have placed too much weight on the provider's staff, sermons, marketing, and programs, one would expect to see certain signs. Paid staffers. If it's true Christians are overly reliant on their church staff to do God's work, you would expect to have a church culture where there are many inactive, ineffective, disengaged Christians. As long as I can remember, I've heard church leaders echo the common 90-10 principle, that 90% of the work in volunteer organizations is done by 10% of the people. Many congregations have resigned themselves to this principle. Many are fighting against it, trying to bump that 10% up to 20 or 30. Talk to any group of ministers and you'll hear complaints about how it's like pulling teeth to get people to join in evangelistic efforts or to sign up to teach Bible classes. Look around your congregation this Sunday. What percentage of the people are taking an active role in ministering to their fellow Christians? What about you? How are you serving, teaching, loving, caring, and or encouraging week in and week out? I'm not talking about attending things that have been put on for you by a provider. No, I'm talking about taking initiative on themselves to minister. There may be congregations where that percentage is much higher than others, even better than 50%, but from my own experiences, from my discussions with other ministers, from what books and studies and sermons have all told us for years, those would be the exceedingly rare exception. This is one where I kind of disagree. I think the heart of the point there is right, and so I maintain that, but I've changed my thinking a little bit. That 90-10%, I've heard it that way. Interestingly enough, the official rationale, the official explanation is that it's an 80-20, and that is called the Pareto principle, or Pareto, depending on who you pronounce it, P-A-R-E-T-O. Vilfredo Pareto was a, kind of hard to break down what he was, philosopher, and I don't know. I don't know what title to give him, but he came up with that idea of 80% is done by 20%, or 20% of inputs produce 80% of the outputs. And this isn't just in churches. He wasn't focused on churches at all. He did point to that in human organization, in politics and things like that, but even in his garden, he said 20% of the plants are producing 80% of the crop. And the same thing in work, that the few that you invest in, that you figure out kind of how to maximize your input, because some things are going to give more of a return than others. And so when it comes to the church, I think there is a degree to which there's an inevitability to this, of you're not going to get everybody producing at the same rate. On the other hand, everyone is expected to supply something, Ephesians 4, but there's also this concept of some are going to do more than others. Now, the part where I still think this is right is the preacher's going to do everything. The preacher and the elders, the preacher, the youth minister, the associate minister, they're supposed to handle it. That's not the 80-20 principle. The 20% is you're going to have a 20% that involves the leadership, but also certain members that are going to drive the most of the work. But that doesn't mean the other people can sit back and do nothing. And so acknowledge that reality, but don't use it as an excuse to let everybody off the hook, I guess is what I would say. All right, continuing on. On the other side of the coin, over-reliance on staff would also make burnout among those staff members a fair expectation, and once again, that's exactly what we often see. Every year, ministers get chewed up and spit out by congregations. Plenty of ministers struggle with depression and anxiety, made worse by the fairly common belief that those who are in ministry and supposedly closest to God shouldn't ever face those struggles. In a system where ministers have to project themselves as flawless or risk losing their jobs, and in a system where ministers are expected to give and give and give and go find their spiritual and emotional nourishment elsewhere, it's no wonder we see burnout. Finally, if our church system is too reliant on the staff, you would expect to see a minister celebrity culture. The best, most talented ministers would end up at the biggest congregations, drawing more people in for the good, preaching, and vision. Let me stop there, actually. I should have covered that last point. The burnout is what you're seeing. There's plenty of articles, plenty of research done on the fewer people filling the pulpits, guys leaving the pulpit, not that many going in to the pulpits. It's becoming an issue because this is an unsustainable process. We are business-like, but it's not the kind of thing where in business you can make more and more and more money. There's kind of a cap on that, and so and they're not in it for the money. I'm not saying that, but you're taking on all this stress, all this anxiety, all this difficult, the weight of people's souls, and all the things that will be piled on you, and yeah, there's all those struggles. And so I wrote a while back on why I'm not going to encourage my sons to go into ministry is I don't want them to be chewed up and spit out by the same processes. Our minister, yeah, there's going to always be a little bit of a dividing line between us, as we talked about in the last episode, but not this strong. Not so much where he's a mercenary of the church kind of thing and will come and go, and then the next guy comes in and we'll know he'll be here for a few years, so we're not going to get that close to him. And all of those issues are very real. All right. Carrying on this next part. If our church system is too reliant on the staff, you would expect to see a minister celebrity culture. The best, most talented ministers would end up at the biggest congregations, drawing more people in for the good preaching and vision. People would seek out sermons from their favorite preachers online and feel more encouraged from those than from anything their local congregation offers. People would flock to conventions with posters that share an odd resemblance with those of music festivals, listing all the big names people will want to travel to hear. What do we see? All of the above. Are we too reliant on the staff? The eye test says yes. This is one where I don't know, a lot of people don't like entertaining this conversation about the celebrity culture, about the conference culture, that we kind of think is the premium way to learn more and grow and all those things. Well, I don't think it's producing the kind of growth we're hoping for, but it ends up in this elevation. And that latter mindset is entrenched at the smaller congregations I've preached for. That sentiment was there among the members, like, well, we know you're here until you get a bigger job offer. We know you're here until the big guys come and snatch you up or whatever it may be. And there is kind of an incentive to do that, to make enough to support your family and all that. But there's also that ladder. Okay, you spend 5 years at the 50-member church, 5 years at the 120-member church, and then 5 years at the 350-member church. Like that kind of thing happens. And I'm not taking shots at anybody who's gone down that path, because again, you got to provide for your family. Again, the opportunities can be good opportunities, but it is kind of this idea of this is what our church needs. And the bigger churches are always going to attract more of the talent, and so they're going to stay bigger, and the smaller churches are hoping to get the right guy coming out of the schools, and it's weird. I don't think that was how it was intended to be. All right, continuing on. Preaching. What would you expect to see if it's true that congregations are too reliant on sermons? You would expect to see biblical illiteracy. If somewhere between 30 minutes and 3 hours is all the teaching a person is exposed to each week, and it's done in the one-size-fits-all manner of sermons and Bible classes, it would be difficult for them to grow to Christian maturity and to know their Bible well. Barna Group research documents this for us. They set out to determine how many people who claimed to be Christians held a biblical worldview. The definition Barna used included holding to 6 basic tenets, believing that absolute moral truth exists, the Bible is totally accurate in all of the principles it teaches, Satan is considered to be a real being or force, not merely symbolic, a person cannot earn their way into heaven by trying to be good or do good works, Jesus Christ lived a sinless life on earth, and God is the all-knowing, all-powerful creator of the world who still rules the universe today. Only 17% of churchgoers agreed with all 6 of those in Barna's 2015 study. Additionally, in a 2001 book titled Boiling Point, How Coming Cultural Shifts Will Change Your Life, George Barna and Mark Hatch share that 81% of professing Christians in one survey thought, God helps those who help themselves was a Bible verse. Only 17% of churchgoers in a 2018 Barna Group study could explain what the phrase Great Commission means. In a time where the Bible is with us more than ever via the smartphone, American Christians know the Bible less than ever. How many in your congregation can list the 10 Commandments or the Beatitudes? How many engage in the regular discipline of memory work? How many can answer the difficult questions put forth by today's atheists? Conversely, how many would say they want to study the Bible better but don't know how to do so? We're just talking about the basics at this point. This does not begin to scratch the surface of what is needed to be holy people, imitating Jesus Christ and becoming more and more like Him every day. How on earth is that going to happen if people are so biblically illiterate and remain spiritually immature? And once again, you'd expect to see the proliferation of premium preaching, the podcasts, the big events, the YouTube videos, revealing an underlying belief that what we need is more, better, one-off lessons from talented speakers rather than slow, steady, personalized teaching. And once again, we're seeing that more than ever with the event calendar being jam-packed year-round. The illiteracy thing is a real big issue. There is stories about, boy, back in the day, we used to be the people of the book, and we just knew the word, and you still see this with some of the older folks where they just can quote Bible verses. And those disciplines are very slowly evaporating. We can say, oh, we're so busy, oh, we've got all these things going on. Yet we know everything that's going on in politics, everything that's going on in sports, everything that's going on in our areas of pet interest. We allow ourselves to be distracted by things that they didn't have the issues with. They never had the pull to get on their phone and scroll social media for an hour. You use that for Bible reading or for memory work, yeah, that's going to happen. But in a business like church, it's kind of, well, we've got you for this long, so we'll get you the teaching you need here. And if that's not good enough, you can go to this conference. If that's not good enough, here's all these other things. And I mean, this is a podcast that I do myself. I got another thing we do, Think Deeper, here at Focus Press. I think those are good resources, but the idea that that's going to solve the problem, there's only so much we can do. We get questions from people in the comments on Think Deeper, and the Godly Young Men guys get the same thing. And we can help a little bit, but from a distance, it's really hard. You need relational discipling from these people, and getting it kind of one size fits all in one shot, kind of trying to tackle it that way, isn't getting the job done. All right, let's continue. Marketing. If business-like marketing truly were a problem in the modern church system, we would expect to see a number of churches opt for crowd-pleasing doctrinal errors. Just like the restaurant that is advertising their food to people has to consider what the customers want and prepare accordingly, business-minded churches are prone to all sorts of compromise as they try to keep up with the congregations around them for the attention and attendance of the community. It's hard to compete with the entertaining, energetic worship being put on by other congregations in town, and people aren't as interested in sound, Bible-based doctrine as much as they are in hearing sermons centered on them and how God is going to fulfill all their hopes and dreams. The marketing approach of selling ourselves rather than Christ and the good news has led plenty of congregations to go all in on entertainment and feel-good preaching rather than humble worship and God-glorifying, Bible-driven preaching. It's kind of enough said, right? It is what it is, of trying to get them to like us. I call it Sally Field evangelism, of you really like me. We really want you to like us, and therefore either we're not going to say the parts of the Bible that the culture doesn't like, or we're going to find a way to water them down, twist them, or immediately turn and start scolding Christians when we do those things, because we kind of want to be on the world's good side. Well, Christians got a real big problem with this too. Well, if they do, we should talk about it, but we can also say that these sins that the world loves are wrong. And so it's this marketing mindset of, but they'll leave if we say that. And that's not, we weren't called to make that call. Continuing. Additionally, if churches are too reliant on business-like marketing, you'd expect to see a lack of enthusiasm for evangelism. The church exploded onto the scene in Acts without a building, a sign, a website, flyers, or anything else we rely on today. It's exciting to try to lead people to Jesus. It's far less exciting to try to get people to come to our church, particularly if as a customer one doesn't feel a particularly strong attachment to the church anyway. As Christianity wanes in our country generation after generation, and as younger generations grow disillusioned about evangelism, we're seeing the effects of church marketing versus gospel sharing. There is a big difference. I think they can go hand in hand if the church is a gospel-centered church that is building up a kind of Christ-like family of loving, holy people, for sure. If it's just kind of, you'll like the experience here, you'll like the preaching here, you'll like what they put on Sundays, that's not evangelism. Finally, if marketing were an issue, you would see Christians who act like customers. In a world of Yelp reviews and a customer is always right economy, customers are more empowered than ever to speak their mind and push for their own way. It's no surprise that there are excuse me, I lost my spot there. It's no surprise that there are plenty of these folks in our churches. It might be that they don't like the song selection, that the sermon was too long, that the proverbial carpet color of their choice wasn't chosen, or that they weren't specifically catered to in some way. So they complain, cause division through rumors and gossip, and threaten to leave because the customer is always right. After all, they contribute and add to the church's attendance numbers, in essence saying, I don't need you, you need me, because the church's marketing told them that. I'm not claiming every Christian is like this, or even most, but there are plenty of them out there, and they've been created by a church culture that tells them it's all about them. Church leaders cannot continue to be surprised when the people they attract as customers come in and act like customers. The old phrase, and we'll get to it later in the book once again, is what you win them with is what you win them to. And if it's, we're here for you, we want you, you are the what we're after, you're kind of our prized possession. And we even say this, you're our honored guest. Well, we're happy to have them visit, but no, it's not about them. It's not to honor them. And I get this. I don't want to read too much into a saying, but you kind of get the idea that we can treat them as like, hey, we really want you here, especially if you're more desperate, if the church isn't growing that much. And they'll act like customers. A lot of people act like church customers and treat the church as a commodity for them to come and take of as they wish. Continuing, programs. If churches are too reliant on programs, you would expect to see a number of effects, starting with the rise of megachurches. More than just about anything, if the modern church were overly reliant on programs, one would surely expect to see the rise of bigger churches and the slow demise of small churches. 2 out of 3 churches with under 100 in attendance are in decline, while most churches with an attendance of over 250 are growing. Church customers are abandoning the congregations that have less to offer and flocking to the ones that have all the programs they might want. Coupled closely with this is the practice of church shopping, where people choose congregations based on what the congregation offers them, rather than on an opportunity to serve and grow close with a spiritual family. And closely related to church shopping is the issue of church hopping. I chose the phone plan I'm on because they offered me a shiny new smartphone for free if I signed up. At the end of my contract, I'm sure I'll switch to another company when they offer me a shinier, newer smartphone. I'll keep bouncing around like that until I die because I'm a customer looking for the best deal for me. If you are under the impression that church is all about you and what they can offer you in your personal walk with God, of course you'll go where you most want to be. Can't get along with a fellow member? There aren't enough activities or kids for your family? They brought in a new preacher you don't like as much? What do? You start looking for somewhere else to go. In most areas in America big enough to house 2 or more churches of a certain type, people just move on to the church a few miles down the road, dropping the old one like an expired cell phone plan. It really is, what programs do you have? What can you offer me? How do I like it here? The smorgasbord that you've laid out for me. And so you kind of get into that discussion of, is it wrong? Well, it's not that. That's kind of the wrong question to ask, is what are you getting out of it? What results, what fruit is this bearing? And if it's bearing church customers, it's worth questioning. If it's true that we're over-reliant on programs in this organizational, business-like approach to church, one would expect to see a number of Christians living with a checklist mentality. It's vitally important to understand this principle. What we win them with is what we win them to. If we didn't get them in the door with the truth of Jesus and the dedication to following Him, we can't suddenly expect them to operate as though that's the deal. If they were won with programs aimed right at them, they are going to expect a church life continually aimed at them. Sacrificing for others, giving up more time, and being a functioning part of the church weren't part of the deal. Put on the service for them, offer them their programs, and they'll do their job of showing up and dropping money in the plate. Ask anything else, change anything up, or cater to somebody else first, and they're gone. And finally, if our business-like church were too reliant on programs, we would also see a heavily individualized Christianity. Because if people are choosing and attending their congregation because of what it offers them, it's only natural that they would view their Christianity as an individual pursuit. Take a look at Christianity from a bird's eye view, and you'll see that it's extremely deep-seated in us to think of our Christianity as a private walk. Most of the Christian living books you will ever read have a you and God focus. While it's certainly of the utmost importance that we each walk with God each day and grow in our individual relationships with Him, Christianity is not a private pursuit. We are not a bunch of disconnected individuals all trying to go to heaven in our own walks, brought together to the church that will help us do so. How many in a given congregation are seeing each other away from the building between Sundays? How many are opening their homes to their fellow Christians? How many are gathering to pray and pore over the Bible with another Christian every week? How many are ministering to others? Once again, in most congregations, that number would be quite low. The power in our congregations is in our unity, and the Spirit working through all of us together. Let's stop right there for a second. The individualized Christianity, I mean, this goes hand in hand with what church pitches to people. And again, what modern Christianity is the you and God. Here's your devotional, your time with God. And yes, you need to have that, but it also needs to have a firm grounding in community with other people, with other Christians shared together and serving each other and all of these other things. And we've gotten to the point where people think they can come to God without even going to a church. But then they also will go to a church and just be a name on the member roll, but that's about it. I mentioned a little bit back, about a page ago, about the bigger churches getting bigger, smaller churches getting smaller. This is part of it. I'm not saying it's wrong to have a big church, but it doesn't take very long before you hit a certain size before all of the elders can't know the names and faces of all their people. That's interesting. That seems to me like it's a problem. You reach a certain point, you can't know your church family members. You can't really spend time with your church family, and you're never going to be that super tight knit with everyone there. But you should kind of know who each other are. And when you reach 800 people, it's a stadium. I mean, you don't know everybody else at the football stadium either, so it doesn't work that way. And this contributes to the individualist Christianity, the choose your own adventure, plug in as much as you want Christianity, because you can just be a fly on the wall. You can just come in, fade into the background, and go home, barely be known, barely be involved, whatever it may be. And that's, again, it's a me and God Christianity, and I come to church for what that adds to my me and God Christianity, rather than I go to church to plug in because that's what God demands of me, and that's how God is going to shape me and grow me, is through the local church. We definitely have to get back to maximizing our view of the purpose of the local church. Continuing, why isn't church more? Perhaps because the church isn't really a church. When it's run like a business by providers and for consumers, it's not a family where everybody provides for each other and looks out for each other. It's not the body God intended it to be, where every system, bone, and muscle helps the other do its job. Until we break out of the provider-consumer paradigm, wipe the slate clean, and get back to the image of church that the Holy Spirit painted for us, church can't ever be more. I'll hit the discussion questions just briefly. What does the biblical concept of church mean? What are ways we use the word? How do the two differ? Again, I think it's usually either the organization, the event, or the building. And church isn't everything. It's not an all-consuming part of life, but your connection to the church is a factor in everything you do in your life. Who you are in the workplace reflects on your church. Who you are as a parent reflects on what that church has taught you and what you are going to bring back to the church when you lead your family back to the church. I mean, every aspect of your life is in connection with the church. It's not something you participate in 1 or 2 days a week. Would you consider yourself to be on the producer side or the consumer side of the church? Again, those questions that were asked of, do you talk about the Bible with people? How are you serving people? Are you having people over in your house hospitably? Whatever it may be. You don't have to do all those things, but if all you do is show up and go home, then you're on the consumer side. What can you do to lessen the divide between those two sides? And so that's the question, is looking at how to get plugged in, how to serve other Christians. And if you're already doing it, that's great. Excel still more. Look at those opportunities as they present themselves. And so just that thought I want to leave with is, if church is going to be more, it has to rise above this business thing. It has to rise above a certain few, the we are here for you kind of thing. Leadership has to view themselves as equippers, as God has put us here to very much step into people's lives and shape them to be cogs in this bigger machine, and view this machine as something beautiful, as something worth investing in. I preached on this recently of everyone, if you grew up, you got to, go to restaurants or whatever it was, your family probably had its favorite places, right? Your favorite hangouts, restaurants, whatever it may be, place to go get on a ice cream cone, whatever it was. Growing up in the Denver, Colorado area, we had a favorite Mexican restaurant, favorite Italian restaurant that come to mind. I don't go there anymore because I don't live there anymore. When I go back, I go and visit and enjoy the food, and I have fond memories, but I moved on. And every phase of your life has things like that, places or people or things that were a memory for a short time and then you moved on. I think that's what church has become. It's become this stopover in a lot of ways. Of it's something you're plugged into for a time, and while it serves you, while it fits with your current lifestyle, and then when that doesn't, you move on to the next church. You go invest in another congregation. You go get involved somewhere else. But really, if you view yourself as trying to put down roots there, that what I look at with my congregation is I want my sons to be elders for that at that congregation 60 years from now. I mean, I hope they're elders before then, but like 60 years down the road, I hope they're shaping the doctrine and the direction and the mission of that congregation. That it requires investment. That requires of not thinking of it as a business that we go to twice a week to go get a good that is being offered to us in spiritual goods to take home for our own consumption. It's not that at all. It's something we are investing in, something we want to be a part of. And you have to think of church that way. And so that's going to finish up chapter 2 for us. We'll, Lord willing, come back around to next week with church reset, of breaking it down into what it's going to take to actually hit that reset button. And so thanks again for tuning in, whether you're catching this on YouTube. If you are, once again, hit like. If you got a comment, leave it there in the comments. And be sure you're subscribed here to Focus Press if you're listening on the podcast app. I really appreciate it. If you're enjoying these, I hope you'll tell people about them, pass them on, share them, send a link. You can send them straight through the podcast app, straight from YouTube, wherever you're getting this. Tell them to join in. Tell them, I mean, you can have a book club. I know some folks have done that with Church Reset over the years. If you've done that before, this might be a good thing to revisit it and come along and see where my thinking's changed, see if yours has changed. And again, I love hearing from people who are invested in making the church all it can be. And so if any message, any comment you have, be sure to send it my way, and I will talk to you guys on the next one.